It's so wonderful here to be with you, and I'm Barbara Duganier, the chairman of the board of NACD, Texas Tri-Cities. We're certainly looking forward to our fireside chat today with Secretary Baker, and I'll forgo our typical NACD announcements and move right to introductions. We're very fortunate to have our fireside chat moderated by Alan Crane, who many of you know. Alan has served on the boards of a number of large NYSE-listed companies and has served as the chair for several of those boards. He's also served on the boards of private companies, startups, and not-for-profits. He's a member of the NACD Texas Tri-City Board of Directors and was recently selected as one of the 2022 NACD Directorship 100. Congrats, Alan. He teaches corporate governance for Rice University's Executive MBA program. And now, it's my great honor to introduce a man who needs no introduction, Secretary James A. Baker III. Secretary Baker has served our country as the 61st Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush, 67th Secretary of the Treasury under President Reagan, and White House Chief of Staff for both President Reagan and Bush, as well as senior counselor to President Bush. He served as Undersecretary of Commerce for President Gerald Ford and ran 15 presidential campaigns. Secretary Baker is joined today by his wife, Susan Garrett Baker. And in less than 10 days, Secretary Baker will celebrate his 92nd birthday. Thank you for your service. And happy birthday.
I think everybody in this room knows that James Baker is always on.
All right.
Well, Secretary Baker, as you know, I have said to him, in fact, I think outside of this room the first time when we were alone, you are my hero. So being with you, and do you recall what you said to me when I said that?
I remember saying it, I remember you saying it, Alan, and it proved to me that you can fool some of the people some of the time.
That is what he said. That was maybe 20 years ago, so the memory is great. We'd come with the idea of speaking a little bit about geopolitical affairs, but there's not much going on.
No.
So I thought we could talk about shooting birds.
That's fine.
That's fine, okay, so no, you all enjoy that.
That's something I know something about.
So in today's world, I think we have to start with Ukraine.
Okay.
If we could get your thoughts on Ukraine and where that might evolve in different ways.
Well, I don't know that anybody could tell you exactly where it's going to evolve. It looks pretty clear to me now that Putin, with whom, by the way, I've met and with whom I've worked, and I need to say this, with whom the United States had good relations for 5 years. As a matter of fact, after the implosion of the Soviet Union in 1991, when I was Secretary of State, for 15 years thereafter, we had good relationship between the West and Russia, between the United States and Russia, under both Yeltsin and Putin. Some of you, Alan, you'll probably remember, Putin came to the Baker Institute here at Rice University and gave a really warm speech about cooperation and so forth, and we did cooperate for some 15 years. Then I think what happened is he got in domestic political trouble in Russia, and he needed a whipping boy, and we're the whipping boy, the West and NATO. It's not to say we didn't make some mistakes of our own as we progressed after the collapse of the Soviet Union. But nothing, I want to emphasize this, nothing in the world that we did or did not do or could have done or could not have done, nothing could justify the brutality and the horror of what Putin has unleashed on the poor people of Ukraine and in fact unleashed on Europe. It's had a lot of consequences already. It's going to have a lot more. I don't think anybody can tell you exactly how it's going to end. The biggest question in my mind is what is going to be the response of the United States when, if chemical weapons are used or if tactical nuclear weapons are used. There was an event maybe 2 weeks ago now up at the State Department where they dedicated a bus to me, and the Secretary of State was there, and he gave some very warm remarks that I deeply appreciate. But we talked a little bit about this, and it's pretty hard to know what you might do under those circumstances. My own view is the best thing a policymaker can do is maintain his or her flexibility. And of course the press will always be pushing you to say, well, exactly what are you going to do under this hypothetical and that and the other? Those are questions that are best left unanswered. I don't think anybody knows, frankly, what action we might or might not take if Putin uses chemical or tactical nuclear weapons in this war. I'm amazed and encouraged and heartened, as I think most of the free world is, with the reaction, the response, and the courage and determination of the Ukrainian people. It's been wonderful to watch. Putin has already failed in trying to take over the whole country and put in a puppet government. And then they had the humbling experience of having their flagship ship of the Black Sea Fleet sunk by the Ukrainians. I mean, it's you couldn't ask for better results than that. But where it'll end, Alan, I don't know, and I'm not sure anybody could tell you exactly how this is going to end. It's quite clear now that if Russia can't take over the whole country, it wants to take those two oblasts or provinces, Luhansk and Donetsk, in the southeast part of the country, where they've been fighting a war for 7 or 8 years already. And they want to establish a land bridge to Crimea, which they've already taken. I think one of the reasons he's been so bold is because when Russia just took Crimea and annexed it, we didn't do anything. We bitched a little, but that was about all we did. Well, you say to yourself, okay, so what would you have done? I'm not at all sure I know what should have been done. One thing I know is we have engaged in enough land wars a long ways from our shores, and we need to be very careful not to be dragged into one here. And one of the things I told Tony Blinken in our meeting at the State Department is that I think that the Biden administration has done a reasonably good job of walking the line between trying to help Ukraine and provoking a broader conflict. That's a hard line to walk. I think they've been slow on some weapons deliveries. I think they've been slow, particularly on some lethal weaponry. We have found ourselves following the Europeans, but by and large and on balance, I don't have any major criticism of the response so far, because I'm one who doesn't think we need another Afghanistan. We don't need another Iraq. We don't need another Vietnam. We don't need another war a long ways from our shores that we don't win. I guess I'm of an age where I came to the United States Marine Corps at a time when we were fighting the first war we didn't win, the Korean War. We fought that war, we didn't win it, but at least we fought it to a standstill. And then since then, we fought all these wars that we haven't won. And that's not something we need to keep doing. But we do need to be strong and resolute and determined in our support of the brave people of Ukraine. And I also say that Putin has accomplished something that no Western leader could ever have accomplished. He has unified the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in a way that nobody could have. And that's a good development. And I think, I should have said this earlier, I think some of our sanctions were too modest. We have too many exemptions for energy sales, which is the lifeblood money-wise of Russia. We could have been tougher there. But those sanctions now, it appears, just first reports, appear to be beginning to bite. So those are my thoughts on Ukraine. Let's go somewhere else if you want.
Well, let's go about halfway around the world. Let's go to China. It still involves Putin a little bit.
Yeah.
Putin and Xi Jinping signed their agreement just before the invasion.
They signed an agreement they would cooperate, they were friends, there would never be any daylight between them. They made all these sweet remarks to each other, hugs and kisses. And now I got to tell you, I'll bet you $1 to a donut that Xi Jinping thinks he's made a bad deal. Because Putin overestimated. He underestimated what the Ukrainians could do. He misjudged. He really misjudged, because there's no way he can paint the operation way up there in Kiev and places like that as a success when he had to pull back. And now he's going to limit the war to the east and the land bridge to Crimea and that sort of thing. So I think it's really important that we continue to support. You know, there was a big debate about bringing Ukraine into NATO. That debate happened after I was there. But it was quite obvious for a long time that the Russians were going to have big problems if we offered NATO membership to Ukraine and to Georgia. And that's clearly the case. But as I said earlier, nothing in the world would justify what he's done and the brutality with which he has executed it. He did the same thing in Chechnya, in Grozny, and he did the same thing in Syria. And the thing is that he intentionally sets out to kill as many and kill as many civilians as he can, thinking quite understandably that will diminish the will to fight of the people who he's fighting. So there's no excuse for it. The West is banding together. He not only strengthened NATO and the unity of NATO, but look at some of our allies who we've never had any success getting to pony up their NATO commitment. 2% of their GDP was what they were supposed to pay, and none of them did it. And the day after this invasion, the brand new left-wing chancellor of Germany came out and said and called for putting into Germany's constitution a requirement, a mandatory requirement that they make a 2% of GDP contribution to NATO every year. So there's been some good that's come from this horrific war, but there can be no excusing what's happened.
Well, you mentioned nuclear weapons, and going back to China, we know they have been building their nuclear weapons at a significant rate. Mm-hmm. Take them a long time to get to the amount that the U.S. has or Russia has. But North Korea recognizes that having their nuclear threat gives them some leverage. And of course, China is key to them, supporting them economically. And other countries in Southeast Asia are having talks. Other countries, even in the West, are having talks about maybe we need our own nuclear capabilities. Could you speak some about?
Well, yeah, that's the nightmare of proliferation, and it's very possible that we're going to see some proliferation. China, of course, has had nukes for a long time. Now they're building more. North Korea is sort of a wild card. And they spend every dime they've got. Their people are starving, but they spend every dime they got on their nuclear. And they have found that it gives them a certain currency and stature that they would not otherwise have had. I thought Trump made a big mistake in putting Kim Jong-un up on the same pedestal as the President of the United States. I thought that was ridiculous. And of course, nothing came of it. North Korea is not going to give up its nuclear weapons unless it's forced to do so. And this goes all the way back, quite frankly, to the end of the 41 George Bush administration, beginning of the Clinton administration. We had a policy of strength, resolve, and determination toward North Korea, and that went away after we lost the election in '92. And the Clinton administration had a policy of engagement with North Korea, which hasn't worked. But the nuclear threat is very much still there. Russia, of course, has more nuclear weapons than any nation in the world. But we got a lot of them ourselves. And we're pretty good at targeting them. And I think Russia knows that. And I know Kim Jong-un knows that. I said something critical about the Biden administration here just now when I said I don't think we've done enough, particularly with respect to lethal equipment. I want to say something, and that was not a serious criticism. That was because I said I think they've walked this fine line pretty darn well. But I want to make a criticism that I think is well justified. And particularly people in this room will understand that, the climate is changing. There's no doubt about that. I don't think anybody here can tell us the extent and degree to which it's caused by human activity, by, for instance, the burning of fossil fuels. We do know the climate's changing, and there's nothing wrong with saying we would like to get to a cleaner industry, a cleaner energy environment, and working toward that end. But to say you're going to ban fossil fuels and to take the actions that this administration has taken against our energy industry is simply schizophrenic. We see prices going up, and it's hurting politically. It's hurting the Biden administration tremendously, hurting the Democrats tremendously politically. And what do we do about it? Do we take the shackles off our domestic energy industry? Hell no, we don't. We cancel the Keystone Pipeline. We approve the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. We tell the SEC they've got to lean on companies to report all this stuff having nothing to do with securities, but having to do with climate. We tell banks don't lend to fossil fuel companies. We say we're going to get off of fossil fuels. Let me tell you something. We're not going to be off of fossil fuels for a long, long time, and we ought to recognize that and understand that climate is a global problem. We can't cure climate change. America can't cure it. We can penalize our energy industry. While the Indians and the Chinese and the Russians and the Brazilians continue to pollute. So it doesn't really make much sense for us to do it, try to do it come hell or high water. And so I really do feel critical about the schizophrenic energy policy of this administration. And they're paying the price. They are paying the price. They are finding out that you can't spend money you don't have, and that you can't just print money to cover those debt expenditures without triggering inflation. And so what's the biggest political problem now they're facing? It's inflation, which, by the way, isn't transitory.
Mr. Baker, Secretary Baker, the energy issue, we've had a special relationship with Saudi Arabia since World War II.
Yeah, that's another problem.
Yeah. Should we move past that one?
No, I think we ought to talk about it, because I said good things about how the war is going and the courageous Ukrainian people in winning the Battle of Kyiv and all that. It's too soon to spike the ball, let me say that. I need to get that in because victory is some ways off, if it ever comes, and I sure hope it does, and I hope and believe it will. But I said our energy policy was schizophrenic. For years, we've had a seamless relationship with Saudi Arabia, biggest producer in the world up until 2 years ago when America became the biggest producer, which we've now said we're going to get rid of that. I mean, for some reason. So here we are with this what has been a wonderful relationship with Saudi Arabia, and now they won't take the telephone call from the President of the United States, and neither will UAE. These are two of the biggest producers in the world. And so prices are going up, and what do? We go hat in hand to Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela. Now how about that? And the Saudis aren't willing to take our call. Those things are bad. Those are foreign policy mistakes that needn't have happened. Yes, the Saudis they do a lot. They don't have our principles and values. Yes, the killing of Jamal Khashoggi was a horrible, horrific act. But we need to figure out a way where to have relationships with those countries. For years, you know, I'm going to tell you one reason that George H.W. 41 went to war in Desert Storm was to protect our secure access to the energy reserves of the Persian Gulf, because Saddam had marched all the way down and occupied Kuwait. Nothing was going to keep him from going down the rest of the Arabian Peninsula but the United States. And my president, George Bush 41, was wise enough and prudent enough to know that that the way to fight a war is to tell the world what you're going to do, get the American people on board behind you. And by the way, we were dealing with a Democratic Congress and a Democratic House and Senate. Democratic House and Democratic Senate. And they didn't want us to go to war, and they were beating up on us a lot. So what did we do? We went to the UN and got a Security Council resolution, which is the gold standard of legality if you're going to take the country to war. And the president told the world what he was going to do. He did exactly what he was going to do and no more, no less. He refused to go to Baghdad. That was a very smart move on his part, because he knew occupying that great big Arab nation of 50 million people or something would be problematic. And he brought after he did what he said he was going to do, kick Iraq out of Kuwait, he brought the troops home. And then guess what? He got other people to pay for it. Now, we've never fought a war that we didn't have to pay for until that one. We did have to pay.
He had a lot of help on that from somebody.
We did pay $10 billion. It cost us $10 billion. A war that cost overall about $90 billion, we paid $10 billion. And we got the people we helped to pay the rest. Now, that's the way to fight a war. But wars are bad. We better not to fight them in the beginning.
Well, I was going to say, back when we were Chief of Staff for Ronald Reagan and then Secretary of the Treasury, he imposed sanctions because of the Soviet activities in Poland. Human rights, really, I think. But it involved pipelines, et cetera. But today, unilateral sanctions historically have not worked. But today, because of the SWIFT system, they're working. And we have more unanimity here supporting them. But that goes to the value of the dollar as a mode of store of value, but also a mechanism for financial transactions. Obviously, Russia would like to have another way. They try to get paid in rubles. China would like to have their currency have something. What do you see for the future of the dollar?
Well, you better explain to them what the SWIFT system is. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe everybody out there, does everybody know what the SWIFT system is? Good, okay, wonderful. Hey.
They've all got phones.
I've just learned it myself. So What's become quite apparent in the last 15 or 20 years is that our sanctions that we put on bad actors are much more effective as economic sanctions when we control their access to commerce through the SWIFT system. So that's given rise to a lot of chatter about replacing the dollar as the de facto reserve currency of the world. When I was Treasury Secretary, we had some of that discussion. I mean, people were talking about it because it's a monopoly that's really valuable to us. And people used to speculate that something was going to replace the dollar as the reserve currency of the world. And I said that's never going to happen in my lifetime. And I'm proving that now that I'm 92. but I don't think it'll ever happen in the lifetime of the youngest person in this room because of a number of factors. One, the strength of our economy, the size of our economy, our paradigm of democracy and free markets, the fact that we transfer power peacefully and we're stable. And so I think the dollar is going to remain the de facto reserve currency of the world for quite some time to come. The biggest threat, in my view, to that is this unrestrained spending that we're doing without any effort, not without even any effort to worry about all this debt. And so I've already said what I think is causing the inflation. I don't think there's any question about that. That's economics 101. You spend money you don't have. You just print money to cover the expenditure. It's gonna bring inflation. But I don't think we're going to lose the dollar because of sanctions or because of the SWIFT system activity we take. We could lose the dollar if we spend so much more than our GDP. Debt to GDP today, ours is about 106%. That's not sustainable in the long term. But we're not doing anything about it. We're adding to it. So that's the one thing that worries me about the big advantage we have as having the dollar as a de facto reserve currency of the world. When people lose confidence in the strength of our economy, they could lose confidence then in the dollar.
No, we have a limited amount of your time, but let me ask at least two more questions. One is, I know you spoke to this a few years ago in a small private meeting. The Biden administration right now is warning of cyber attacks.
Yeah, cyber's bad.
And the Russians have a sophisticated group working on that, many groups working on it. A few years ago, I remember we had a discussion and you said that you had spoken to people in the appropriate areas. So can you, what
well, cyber's a threat. Cyber is a threat. It's easily, it's easily done. It's to some extent easily hidden. But I know for a fact that our Defense Department and our national security agencies are gearing up. We've got pretty good cyber capabilities. I think that discussion you're talking about 2 years ago was around a suggestion by a guy named Peter Pace. He was a commandant of the Marine Corps, and he's now doing work on cyber for the government, or he was. And he made a suggestion, which I thought was a really good one, which is we ought to tell the Chinese and the Russians and the North Koreans and people like that who are playing these cyber games that we're not going to attack them offensively with our cyber. But we have the capability of removing their blocking mechanisms that keep their people from accessing the internet. And that's something that'll put the fear of God into them. And we do that. If we do that, that could have a really salutary effect on the cyber threat. But it's out there, And it's something that our policymakers know about and something we're preparing for, I think.
So let me ask you, I mean, you and your family, I mentioned, or I think the introduction mentioned I teach at Rice University. I'm proud to, at the Graduate School of Business. You placed your Institute for Public Policy there. And of course, without your grandfather, there might be no Rice University. And if you all don't know that story, then you better buy his book, or his second book, I guess. It was your mini autobiography, which will tell you all that story. But how important to you is it, and how important do you think it is for our country to make sure our populace, particularly our younger members of society, are well-versed and well-educated in civic duty and political participation for our country's future?
Well, I've always said that I was really fortunate to be Secretary of State when I was, because everybody at that time wanted to get close to Uncle Whiskers. I mean, we were the 800-pound gorilla, okay? And nobody was ever going to question us. And all you had to do, if you fly to 90 plus 100 other countries and see the way they look at the United States, you'd appreciate them. I mean, they admire us, some of them resent us, but they, you know, you want to be respected by your allies and feared by your adversaries, okay? That's what we were for many, many years, and I hope we'll be able to continue that. But I've also said for years that I really think it is important to give back to the most wonderful country in the world. We're fortunate to live in the best country in the world. And you fly around all these countries like I did and see how much they admire the United States or are jealous of the United States, and you appreciate that. My pal George Bush, when we started his campaign for president in '79, had a saying. He would on this issue. He would go out and he would say, "My father inculcated in me an approval or something for public service. Inculcated in me an appreciation of public service." And I finally went to him. I hope I can say this here. I finally went to him. I said, "George, don't say inculcated." I said, "That sounds like a venereal disease." And he finally stopped saying inculcated. But he felt the same way. And he, you know, he's the guy, that lovely person, my close friend for 60 years, who got me interested. When my wife died, he came to me and he said, "You know, Bake," he said, "you need to take your mind off your grief and help me run for the Senate here in Texas." I said, "Well, George," I said, "that's a great idea except for two things. Number one, I don't know anything about politics. I was too busy trying to make it in the competitive atmosphere of a major law firm. I didn't have time for politics." So I said, "Number one, I don't know anything about politics, and number two, I'm a Democrat." He said, "Well, we can take care of that latter problem." And we did. But in those days, those of you who are old enough know that in those days, everybody was a Democrat, and the dividing line was whether you were a conservative Democrat or a liberal Democrat. And I was a conservative Democrat. They all became Republicans. But that was back in the days when being a Republican in Texas was a hanging offense. I mean, there weren't any Republicans. My wife Susan is here today. Why don't you stand up, honey, and let people say hello to you. And her mother worked on the state Republican Executive Committee for many, many years. Again, back in those days when you couldn't find a Republican. And now look where we are today. Texas is every bit as much a one-party state today as it was back then, but it's a Republican state and not a Democratic state, at least in the major offices. Now, I don't know how long that'll last. there have been predictions for many years that Texas was turning purple and they was going to go Democratic, but they haven't. They actually haven't proven out. I don't think it's going to happen in this midterm.
So the Baker Institute, I've had the honor of being there and speaking there, and it's one of the world's best, most renowned think tanks. But it also has a teaching element that perpetuates.
Yeah, we've started I'll tell you what, the history of the Baker Institute is when we lost in '92, Charles Duncan, who was chairman of the Board of Rice, and George Rupp, who was president, later became president of Columbia, I think, came down to see me in the White House and said, we want to start a public policy institute in your name at Rice University. I said, would that be all right? I said, I'd be honored. I really would. I said, but there'd be two things I think that are important. Number one, don't expect me to raise all the money. Well, that went away pretty quick, and we've raised a lot of money because the Institute has succeeded. And number two, I said we ought not to grant a degree because then the faculty at Rice will not accept the Institute. They'll see it as competitive for resources. And so we didn't. We started out not granting any degree. Now we have a master's in public administration or something like that that we have a number of students, and we're going to continue to expand at the Institute what we're teaching. But the really remarkable thing is we started this 28 years ago. We had a foundation grant of $5 million, that's all. We had no building, we had no offices. I was able to recruit Edward Dirigian, who had worked for me at the State Department, who was then our sitting ambassador to Israel. And he gave that up and came here all the way here to this backwater Houston, Texas to start a policy institute. We don't have any policy institutes in the middle of the country. They're all on the East Coast or the West Coast, or for the most part. But he came here, and and we were very fortunate to get him and his wife, Françoise, and for a long time, Ed's office was a broom closet in Fondren Library. We didn't have anything. Now, we are ranked, and for the second year in a row, we have been ranked number one university-affiliated think tank in the world. That's a really significant. And the reason is that one of the main reasons is because we are at Rice. We're not just at Rice, we are of Rice. And that's a wonderful academic institution. And so our scholarship has some resonance and some credibility that it might not otherwise have. But that's a pretty damn good ranking. And our energy center, by the way, is number 2. And we have a really good energy center, as you know. But it's been a great pleasure to be with all of you today. Are we finished?
I want to ask you, I take a hint
I
pretty
hope
well.
I hope we're not finished. I don't want to go. I got to go do a stress test. I'd much rather stay with you than you.
Well, since you are my hero, and I mean that sincerely, you know that, I want to look forward a few years. When I'm 92, I want to celebrate my birthday like you do. I know many people, they go to the beach, they sit down, they read a book, because at 92. What are you going to do on your 92nd birthday?
Well, Susan and I are going to leave in 2 weeks for Namibia in Africa, which is a country on the west coast of Africa. I was privileged to represent the United States of America at the Independence Day celebration of Namibia in 1991. That's where I became the first official from any country to meet with Nelson Mandela. He'd just gotten out of jail 2 weeks before, and I had a wonderful meeting with him there. And we're going to go back there, my wife Susan and me and 2 other couples, of course, younger couples, because I want to shoot a buffalo, a Cape buffalo. I've done about 5 of those, and I want to do one when I'm 92 years old. So we're going in 2 weeks.
Right, thank you, sir. That helps me have my plan for the future. Well, we've taken too much of your time, but I couldn't spend too much time with you.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll get to do this some more when you have time for us.
Yeah.
Please join me in thanking Secretary Baker.